Good evening everyone, my name's Jess and I'm a tutor here at Coding Kids. Tonight we're coming to you live from our new office space at Fishburners on Queen Street. In today's episode we'll be talking about events. We'll be explaining what they are and looking at some events in the context of Scratch. In computer science, an event is a change in the state of an object. This change is often brought on as a result of user interaction. But what do I mean by this? Well, think about any key on the keyboard. They have two states, right? Pressed or not pressed. It's also the same for a mouse, pressed or not pressed, and once again, the same for a button, clicked or not clicked. I'll give you an example of some user-generated events. Mouse events, for example, the left and right mouse, pressed or not pressed, or moving the mouse in a certain direction and or a certain distance. Keyboard events, for example, detecting the press of a certain key. Touchscreen events, like detecting touch and detecting gestures. And finally, device events, for example, rotation, shaking, and tilting. There are, of course, events that aren't generated by user inputs. These might include things like a web browser loading an entire web page, or a sensor receiving sensory input. We can use events as a means of triggering certain behaviours. We can also use events to tell a program what should happen under a particular circumstance. As you can see, these are a very useful concept in programming. Now I want to ask you a question. Have you ever heard of event-driven programs? Well, event-driven programs are programs whose control flow is dictated by certain events. Think of it as a program that is always in a particular state until a certain event occurs. When the program detects this event, it then changes states so that it can appropriately handle the event. Now let's take a look at Scratch. You can find events in Scratch under the Scripts tab in the Events category. Let's take a look at a few. When flag clicked event lets us decide what should happen when we click the green flag button. The when key pressed event lets us decide what should happen when we press a certain key. By default, it's set to the spacebar, but we can change this to a variety of other keys. Using the arrow keys and the X and Y axes is a really common method for getting sprites to move around the stage. As you can see, we have programmed the down arrow to move the sprite down and the up arrow to move the sprite up. We have then programmed the left arrow to move the sprite left and the right arrow to move the sprite right. Now if we test this with the arrow keys, you can see Scratch move on the stage. The when sprite clicked event lets us decide what happens when the user clicks on a sprite. The when background switches to X block acts as a pair with the switch background to X block, which you can find in the looks category. You can use it to determine what happens when the background switches. The when X is greater than X block pairs with three blocks that you can find in the sensing category. Loudness, timer, and video X on this sprite. But we'll talk more about how to use sensing blocks in a later video. The when I receive X block pairs with the two broadcasting blocks beneath it. Before we wrap up this video, just a quick reminder that enrolments for Term 3 classes will close at 5 p.m. this Friday, the 14th of July. We are located at 20 schools in the Great Brisbane region. You can enrol online at www.codingkids.com.au and be sure to do it before Friday. Join us on Thursday where we'll talk about control flow. See you then!